This is our 11th town hall, and I'm delighted to introduce the president of AIA Los Angeles, Greg Varabian, who's a design director and principal at HKS Architects.
All right, well, thanks, Will, and looking forward to another good discussion today. This is our 11th virtual town hall, that's right, and to host this has been interesting, ever since this pandemic started. I do believe that it has really improved our communication with our members. It's allowed a nice kind of connection to everybody, and I hope we can continue some form of this for sure, even after we're through this pandemic. Last night, just wanted to make a note, the AIA LA board officially ratified the AIA LA Committee on Justice, Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity, officially called the JEDI Committee. So that's a really good piece of news for all of us. And then earlier this month, the AIA LA officially supported to our membership SoCal NOMA's DEI challenge. And I think, Will, there's a few things here you might want to just put onto the chat box in case someone needs a link. But I recommend people go to SoCal NOMA's website and check that out and join the challenge. And in light of this systemic inequities made more visible by the impact of the pandemic, as well as the tragic events involving police brutality and systemic racism, Mayor Garcetti signed Executive Directive number 27 to study and promote racial equity in all city departments. This directive will also implement affirmative action in city contracting with the possible repeal of Prop 209 on the November ballot. Again, Will will put some of these links into the chat box. ED 27 also created a City of Los Angeles Racial Equity Task Force and appoints Deputy Mayor Brenda Shockley, who is joining us today as LA's Chief Equity Officer. AIA's National Guideline for Equity Practice Diversity Recognition Program, Women's Leadership Program, and other EDI resources to strengthen those core values are also on the national AIA.org website. And now I would have the great pleasure to introduce Stephen Lewis, FAIA. Stephen is our 2020 AIA LA Robert F. Kennard EDI honoree, so clap for him. Stephen Lewis brings, and I'm gonna read Stephen's whole life story here, so just bear, I hope he's okay with that. Stephen Lewis brings to ZGF a wealth of experience across urban planning and design, most recently holding a post with the City of Detroit, where he served as a design director for the city central region of Detroit's Department of Planning and Development, as well as holding a professorship in practice at the University of Michigan, leading design studios focused on community issues and urban planning. He was a founding partner of the firm Raw International in Los Angeles, where he helped build a successful design practice over a 20-year period and collaborated with ZGF on memorable projects, including the Exposition Park Master Plan, the California Science Center, that made a real difference in the fabric of their communities. In 2004, Stephen accepted an invitation to join the U.S. General Services Administration's Office of the Chief Architect in Washington, D.C., where he served a 4-year term as program manager. In addition to this excellence across the built environment, Stephen demonstrates a commitment to equity in the profession that infuses every part of his professional life. He was a Loeb Fellow at Harvard Graduate School of Design for the 2006 and 7 academic year, where he focused on the issue of race within the profession of architecture. In December of 2010, Stephen concluded a 2-year term as president of NOMA, traveling around the US and several other countries, advocating for architects of color. He used his platform as president to prioritize cultivating the next generation of diverse architects and designers. Stephen was the 2016 recipient of AIA's esteemed Whitney M. Young Jr. Service Award and was elevated to the AIA College of Fellows. He holds a Bachelor of Architecture from Syracuse University School of Architecture. And with that, Stephen, take it away.
The dreaded mute button. I will definitely send you my short bio if this ever happens. It's a real good afternoon, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity, this honor of introducing our keynote today, who I have now known for decades. In Brenda's role as president of Community Build, which was a 24-year labor of love, and I know that, RAW, my firm, was commissioned to design the building in Leimert Park at 43rd and Degnan. And as I was sharing with some of the leadership before we let everyone else into the room, a story I'm not really proud of, but I had come up with a really incredible design for the project. Craig and Brenda loved it. It just turned out to be twice what the budget was. And so we had to design, and we ended up with a wonderful project that's still evidence of what Community Build was able to provide to neighbors. And, you know, Brenda's had a rich career in public service. She was practiced as a practicing attorney back in the day. And when she served as president of the Drew Economic Development Corporation, but then this move into service, first for the community through her very active advocacy role as president of Community Build, and more recently through her mayoral appointments to the role of economic development chief and chief equity officer for the city. That second role, chief equity officer, has greater resonance today than it did as short a time as 3 months ago, where we are all focused on the current state of affairs, perhaps at a tipping point to not solving issues of systemic racism, but a tipping point to having the majority of us enter a path, which is a lifelong journey now, to really address these issues and take personal responsibility, each and every one of us, as we have come to hear recently. Simply proclaiming that I am not a racist is no longer adequate, and we have to declare ourselves as anti-racist, and if we want to wind up on the right side of history. But with that, you can expect a very provocative and really interesting conversation from where Brenda sits in all of this, and as she is now kind of working for us, all of the citizens of the city of Los Angeles, how ways in which we might ask her to be accountable. And I think the chat feature is working today, and I would encourage any and all to use it freely. I believe that the chat will be sort of recorded or memorialized afterwards and made available. That's typically how this stuff goes. So if that's a possibility, you'll be able to see your thoughts and everyone else's in retrospect. So with that, is my extreme pleasure to introduce my friend, Brenda Shockley.
Thank you, Stephen. And did I hear that you are a Robert Kennard Fellow? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, you know, my heart is tingling about that one because, you know, Bob was a mentor and a supporter of ours when we started RAW. I'm fortunate to still be close to Gail, his daughter, who took over the firm when Bob passed. But he's the giant that came behind Paul Williams.
Of course, he was my dear friend. And so the notion that you as my friend are one of his scholars, Bob is happy and he is beaming.
Thank you so much.
I found myself thinking, I met Will, what was it, a year ago, maybe a little longer. I just no longer have a sense of time. And we said we wanted to do something. And at that time I was still simply the deputy mayor for economic opportunity. And, you know, we talked about ways that we could look at things and things to do. And I keep looking at the screen. And before I go any further, I have to say that one of the total high points of my time in the mayor's office, and this year will make, it's like 4 years, was when we came up with what I came in really focused on homelessness. And I was drawn to the fact that here we were 9%, African Americans were 9% of the population, and yet we were close to 40% of the homeless population. More than that, the realization or the acknowledgement that Skid Row was the largest unsheltered population in the nation. And then you couple that with the UN rapporteur coming and stating that after his tour that Syrian refugees were better accommodated than people living in Skid Row. Out of that, our first project was, you go to Skid Row and you see how people are living, and there was nowhere for them to just have their own, just the basics of hygiene. And we came up with an idea called the Refresh Spot. We didn't really know how we were going to do it, but we knew it had to happen. And I can't even continue to talk without acknowledging Stephanie Regal, because she and Office 42 brought that project to life. And it is a project that is not an exaggeration to say that because of that, 20,000 people a month are able to bathe, are able to have their personal, are able to do their laundry. And so in front of her colleagues, I wanted very much to share what an incredible job not only has she done, but they are doing, and in fact are now designing the offices for the newly created Civil and Human Rights Department for the City of Los Angeles. So I just, there are moments when you just want to be able to say and to acknowledge to someone how much you appreciate all that they did and did quickly, and never worried, should have worried, but never worried about when and how the city was going to compensate and honor its contracts. So in front of everyone, I want to say thank you to you, Stephanie, and thank you to Ben, even though you're not here.
Thanks, Brenda. I appreciate it.
So my this new,
Mayor,
and trust me.
Before we get started with the conversation, I want to just do a quick courtesy introduction to let you know that we have Renee Yancey also joining us today. She is the Managing Director of Workforce Strategy and EDI Development for AIA National in Washington, D.C. So she's joining us on this virtual platform. She joined AIA National in 2019 and serves as the Managing Director, and her areas of focus include development of leadership programs, volunteer management, development of publications, and content research and management of key strategic relations. Renee, you're on the call, and I just want you to make sure you introduce yourself to Deputy Mayor Brenda Shockley, and we're looking forward to a robust conversation here to hear what not only is the City of LA doing, but also AIA National, and then how the LA chapter can serve as a stronger resource to both of your initiatives and endeavors.
Thank you for that introduction, Will. And Deputy Mayor Shockley, we had a moment to say, extend greetings a moment ago. I'm happy to share the conversation with you, and really looking forward to getting to the Q&A and sharing some insights as well. There's much learning around this virtual room, and excited to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
So thank you, Renee. And I really look forward to the Q&A and to know what you're doing nationally, because so much of one thing about COVID, all of a sudden we are all the same. We are all struggling in the same way. And I have to say that earlier today, I had a call with Christopher Hawthorne, and he has a meeting at this moment with the mayor. So he wasn't able to be here. But to show you how few degrees of separation there are, he works with the committee, the cultural committee that deals with civic memory. And who does he work with closely? But Gail Kennard, Robert Kennard's daughter, who has taken over the firm. So it really, and someone obviously I've known many, many years, and they are looking at equitable space. So there's the sense of everyone recognizing that this is the time to set the table, reset the table, and have places for everyone at that table. The Executive Directive 27, and I think you described it great, and it's in the chat room, and I'd rather us have conversations. I won't go over it in great detail other than to say that it is a way that the city has acknowledged it's at best benign, but in many ways sometimes intentional lack of racial equity, lack of racial fairness. And Executive Directive 27 is really about three things. The first is to find out where we are, to have a baseline. The second is to make racial equity a core value in the governance of the city of Los Angeles. And third is to be able to measure it, track it, and to have accountability for the goals and the outcomes that are included in these racial equity plans that every department is required to do. Now, the mayor signed this on Juneteenth, which is June 19th, which is what I would like to call an informal African-American holiday. And based on that, to me, and going forward, that even though we're doing the plans, even though the departments are engaged, that there are other components that happen now. And part of that is for whether it's COVID money, whether it's FEMA money, whether it's state of California dollars, that all the funds in this city be looked at through a racial equity lens, and how, in fact, those funds are being allocated, and whether or not all citizens are getting their fair share. The other thing, and that was on June 19th. On July 1st, the mayor convened a group of private sector, and I extend this to all of you who are doing business for yourselves, and to AIA, that inviting the private sector to embrace and incorporate the principles of ED 27 in their hiring, promoting, and equity efforts. And we had just an initial group of about 27 on a short notice who said, yes, we want to be there. And I will be happy to send information, because I think that was wonderful. We have to do it all together. You can't wait for the city, and the city can't wait for you. The world is done waiting. We are out of time. And all of us need to do everything that we can possibly do. And to have AIA or representatives to be a part of this private sector task force, I know the mayor would be really, really appreciative. In terms of, and one of the things I wanted to say, I made my sort of notes, and it really had to do with Will's email about, what can be done? What can we all do around justice and equity and fairness and all? And I think that one of the things that's so simple, but yet so hard because of past pressures, but may not be so difficult going forward, is don't look away. We talk about equity, but equity is simply fairness. And fairness, we all know. We may, wordsmith what equity means, but everybody knows what it means to be fair. And everyone knows that for someone to have an advantage is not fair. For someone else to be put at a disadvantage is not fair. It's that simple, but so complicated, because this society, this United States, has never been able to confront what I regard, and on so many have said, was just an utter, just a humanitarian shame. And the notion of it, I think about myself and how I don't have any problem saying I am the descendant of a slave, chattel property. But I have never in my life heard anyone say, I am the descendant of a slave owner. that is where the conversation will have to begin. Among us, between us. I think about the architects that I know and knew, and almost to the person, they were artists, really. And Stephen, you'll appreciate this. The building that Raw designed and was it was built to replace a market and a fraternal lodge that were burned down in 1992. And we were able to get that property Raw designed. Yeah, it had, I must say, twice the price is not unusual in my experience with architects. So after there was a beautiful rendering, then we had to get real. But it's still a lovely project, and it set the tone for Degnan. Not only that, I am very proud that we anchor that building that Raw anchors one end of Degnan, which is considered the epicenter of African American culture and commerce in Los Angeles. And the building that anchors the other end is Mark Bradford's gallery. And I think they complement each other so much. Mark he is on the board of Community Build, and I am on the board of Art and Practice. And it's where you see how that sensitivity comes together. But my point was really that so many, and I was reading about Norma Sklarek and how she was the most incredible of all project managers and this and that. But it was not, Wikipedia straight out said, she was not allowed to design because she couldn't be presented to the client, that they didn't think the client would feel comfortable. And so in order to still ply her trade and do what, and I saw Bob go through the same thing, he and Art Silver. I saw Carrie Jenkins do the Martin Luther King Hospital. I saw the compromise that African American architects, I saw George Sneed out at the community college system. All of these people, they were artists too, but they weren't very often given the opportunity to put what their design. They were allowed to implement other people's designs and do it beautifully. But I don't think very many people go into this field because they want to keep a project on schedule. I think they go into this field like I went into law because you saw the entirety of what the experience could be. And I look now, and it's very interesting, and this is where we get into 209. If you look at, I was a beneficiary of the affirmative action, even though I was pretty much out of school and but was appreciative of what you could do in terms of the government, private sector, when you had that as a tool. It's hard to believe that 24 years ago, 209 was repealed. And so you have 24 years of people who were disadvantaged, but couldn't be brought up to the starting line because of the law in the state of California. We do now have the opportunity to regain that tool and also to look at how to use it in the way that is as broad as possible, because this is not Executive Directive 27. It's not about taking from one group to give to another. It's not that if one group is acknowledged, if their grievances are acknowledged, that somehow it diminishes the other grievances. That is the beauty and the promise of equity. that people are given what they need, and that fairness and equity, they do not run out. They don't expire. So you're able, everyone is entitled to and able to receive not only what they need, but what they are entitled to and what they too can benefit from. I know the field of architecture, it's like the field of law, it's like everything, because that is what institutional racism is. I can go anywhere, any profession, and we all tell the same story. Because that's what structural racism is. So in many ways, you have the answers. You know far better than I how people are not really included or how they're relegated to doing only certain jobs. When I became a lawyer, I was told straight out, when I worked in a firm, we only let you can do family law and you can do probate, but that's about it. And I said, thank you very much, and moved on. But that was our reality then. That was because I was a woman and I was an African-American woman. And if they had to bring us in, those were the only places. You can't handle liability, it's too much money. You can't do this, they don't know. So it doesn't matter. The fact is, this AIA, it could be the building trades, it could be, I have these meet calls with Hollywood and the music industry, you name it. It is insidious to our entire society. And it is on each and every one of us to examine ourselves, to examine our workplace, and to take actions that we can be proud of and that can result in us together turning the page and going forward. I'm going to stop. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Renee.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Renee, we look forward to hearing from you and what AIA National is working on everyone's behalf. So thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. And again, thank you to the board and leaders of AIA LA for, one, organizing this town hall discussion and keeping this topic and these complex topics front of mind. And again, Deputy Mayor Shockley, it felt like an education moment, just hearing your experiences and the many friends in architecture and beyond and what you're doing for the city of Los Angeles. So thank you for your public service over a great number of years. Many people benefit from the work you have done and what you are doing and what you will do along with the administration. So the title of the town hall really struck me. And, you know, this idea of justice and equity being at the center is an important concept to just hold on to and to carry with us as we move through this discussion and other discussions. And I often describe this time as being at the crossroads. So we are at the crossroads of opportunity to address and dismantle systemic injustice and racial inequity. But we're also at that crossroad where there is political divide. It's very real. We are in a global health crisis. Many of us are working from home or all other alternative locations. There are significant economic shifts underway, along with that fundamental cry for basic human and civil rights and dignity. So this is a moment, but it is also an uncertain moment for many of the reasons that I just enumerated, plus many others. But we also can't lose sight of the reasons that these conversations have reached the forefront right now. The tragic death of Mr. George Floyd was a galvanizing moment that sparked a global movement. But we can't let that moment be just that moment. I think we give honor to Mr. Floyd and the countless others who have lost their lives to tragic circumstances. And inequity is at the center of that conversation. So I'm the granddaughter of a Southerner. So I have to tell a quick little story. And the story, and some of you may have heard this before, but we can, again, hold these thoughts as we navigate through the conversation. And it's the subject of going upstream to find solutions to pressing challenges and problems. So the story is that of two architects. They're walking along the banks of the Los Angeles River, and one of the architects sees startlingly a baby in the water. The baby is alive, the baby is floating through the water, but it's unattended. And so the architect swoops in, safely gets the baby out of the water, places the baby on the shoreline, and no sooner than she did that, she saw another baby. And then she saw another one. And then there were babies just coming through the water. So both architects jump in the water. One is trying to get to the shoreline again to get the babies safely onto the water. And then onlookers come. And people from the community start to gather around. And some are in the water and some are in the shoreline and they're caring for the babies. And then suddenly, one of the architects jumps out of the water and starts walking upstream. And, you know, people are saying, well, what are you doing? We need you here. We need you problem solving right here. And you know what she says? She says, I'm going upstream. I got to figure out why these babies are in the water. And so in addition to the artistry of architecture, architects are also significant problem solvers. They're at the table alongside elected officials and appointed officials, identifying ways that we can come back safely to our offices and to our places of work. They're at the table ensuring that there is a community engagement process as buildings are designed and the built environment is structured. They're working with planners and others and community members. So I want that concept of problem solver to be front and center. And so she goes upstream and they figure out what's going on. So she solved a significant problem. There are no more babies in the water, but when we escalate that out and we look at the enormity of the challenges ahead of us, we see that we need many, many voices at the table. So if we were to look at the future, and let's use 2030 as our destination, we are envisioning from the AIA national perspective, a place where what may seem like insurmountable matters, such as climate crisis, that we will require courageous, creative, and decisive action, where people everywhere are united under a common pledge to build and create an equitable, resilient, regenerative, and carbon-free future. And that includes, again, the workplace, the education systems, but the environment that we all enjoy, that it is one that is safe, regenerative, and resilient. And so I'm often also struck by the notion that the systems are broken. I hear that often. And my retort to that is, yes, they're broken for some, but not for all. And so the systems that we have right now, whether it's a K-12 system, a higher ed system, employment, transportation, across the board, those systems are designed precisely to have the outcomes that we have today. So if we go upstream and we look at what's causing some of the challenges that we have to address and tackle systems alongside of the day-to-day operational issues that are more of the issues that we can touch and see and feel, but the longer term sustained change really happens at the systems level. So as AIA National, we occupy three primary roles. We wear three hats, if you will. So we're first and foremost, like AIA LA, we are a membership society. We have about 90,000 members, and we're an international organization, but most of our members are primarily in the United States. We're also an employer, and you'll see why I'm making that distinction in just a moment. And we also, through the varied experiences, such as those of Stephen, whom you heard from earlier, many who Brenda and Stephen referenced, and Greg and others who are on the line who are architects, you have expertise and your engagement matters. So the kinds of work you do, the practices that you have contribute to the solutions that we know are possible for the long term. So as AIA National has considered its contributions, and we're very much in formation. So I was just on a call earlier with one of our communications colleagues, and I said, you know, we're in a learning process, and that's a luxury place to be, make no doubt about it. But we are also in an iterative process. And so as we're in conversations such as these and others, we're bringing in information, we're expanding our knowledge, and we will be shifting as necessary as times change. But as we had envisioned our work, we have 5 primary areas that we are focusing on. And first is dismantling any of the barriers within the AIA systems. Again, we're an employer, we're a membership society. And so that includes for us, our governance. So what do our bylaws say that may be unintentionally excluding very talented folks from being at the table? What do we know about our honors and awards? Who is being honored? Who are the juries who make those selections? What are the application or nomination processes that may be unintentionally excluding folks? What about our own internal policies, our vendor selection, our hiring, our retention, and any other business practice that intentionally or unintentionally contributes to injustice? So we're doing 2 things. We are participating in a report card that the NAACP is assessing over a dozen other organizations as a cohort, and we will be graded, if you will, alongside other entities. You may be familiar with these kinds of report cards that the NAACP releases. They've done so for the financial services industry. They have done so for the hospitality industry. And we want to be very transparent. We want to learn and we want to understand from an outside perspective what we can do better. So our policies, our practices, and our programs are under deep scrutiny. I've been calling it interrogating every element, every decision-making tool that we have so that we can scrub our own culpability in excluding folks, again, maybe unintentionally, but we want to really deeply examine those. And then we're also identifying the resources necessary to bring in a colleague, a partner, to have an independent equity assessment. So once we have the NAACP findings, you know, trusted organization, we want to further examine, because they'll take a look at, you know, many of our areas, but there are some that we may want to go deeper on. So that's the first thing, the barriers that are within AIA. Secondly, when we look at the profession, the number of architects from underrepresented groups, and by underrepresented groups, and by that I mean specifically women, people of color, LGBTQI plus individuals and individuals who may have diverse abilities. And especially when we look at Black architects, the number of Black architects certainly is much, much smaller by comparison to other racial and ethnic groups. So few things need to happen along those lines. More career readiness and awareness about the profession, ensuring that there are smooth pathways into the profession. That's at the college and university level, and certainly at the K-12 level as well. And that we work together with the licensure bodies to make more smooth that pathway from graduation to licensure. Now, I know many registered architects are on the call. I am not an architect. My career is 30 plus years of working in just this space. But what's important to note is that it's expensive to attend School of Architecture. There are technology costs, there are material costs that may be different than if you're studying, say, accounting as an example. We also know that post-graduation, whether you have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, there's also a number of years of experience that counts toward your licensure process, and then a series of exams to ensure that you are licensed and ready, and that you can certify the health, safety, and welfare and well-being of any building that you design. That whole process may take 12, 13 years or so from school to completion to licensure. That for many is out of bounds and out of stretch. And then salaries within the architecture profession are not particularly known to be high salaries, high earning wage positions in those, especially in those early years. So those are issues that may be contributing to the barrier, but we need to examine that and work with other partners to identify what can we do along those pinch points where we may just lose people from the profession, or that people don't see a path forward into the profession. Third, we know that training is, it's the easiest of lifts, if you will, but it's still required. So how are juries, committee members, volunteers, and others, staff and board trained so that they understand implicit bias, they understand how to be anti-racist actively, and active partners and allies. And I'm also careful to recognize that once you receive training, if you will, you're not inoculated and then suddenly you're good, you're done, you check the box and everything's well and good. No, that's a continual education process. But we know that enhancing knowledge, even getting facile with terminology that's shifting and changing is important as a continual process. And then fourth, I reference climate action. That's, the deep work around sustainability, resilience. We need stronger connections, and this is more of an internal function. My team primarily oversees the workforce side. We also have a team on the practice side who is deep in the climate action work. So we need to build intentional bridges across those teams. And then AIA has just released its 2021 through 2025 strategic plan. And part of that work is to bring to life equity, justice, inclusion, diversity within the heart of that strategic plan. Because for this effort to work, it must function across the entire AIA National, and then certainly with partners such as state and local chapters like AIALA. We know that we have really able and willing partners who are expert. We're learning from them. We're in this, time together navigating this space. With that, I just want to pause for a moment because I've put a lot out there. I did put a link to a resource. It's in the chat, so I imagine the chat will be preserved and codified, but if you are interested, one such resource that you may find of interest, particularly for firms and firm leaders, is the AIA Guides for Equitable Practice. There are currently 9 chapters of the guides, and they span a range of topics. One in particular that I'd like to call out is on the subject of community engagement. And this resource is very rich. We produced this in partnership initially with the University of Minnesota, and then as the Dean of the School of Architecture, Renee Chang, whom some of you may know, is now with the University of Washington. We've been working very closely with her, and the guides are available. They're free of charge, just download them. They're a little dense, I will say. They're about 20, 25 pages, but they are designed in such a way that you can literally cut, parts of them out, use them as flashcards. We've heard that firms are having happy hours and discussions around the content of the guides. And soon to be released, we have, as time, evolves rather quickly and language changes, we have three more related assets that are coming out very soon. And one is a glossary of terms, because, you know, this language is shifting pretty frequently. The New York Times just had a installment a week and a half ago on the sudden use of BIPOC. BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. It's kind of everywhere now. And so we thought, oh, okay, well, you know, almost a year ago when the guides were released, that term wasn't as closely used in the lexicon as it is today. So, you know, we're releasing a glossary so that more commonly used terms are defined, and, you know, for further exploration, you can check those out. The other asset that's coming out that's related to the guides, because we know not everyone has time to read a 25 or so page chapter, we have executive summaries. They're not intended to replace the chapters, but they are a way to get a little more familiarity with the topic, and you'll know where to go for further exploration. So they're coming out, those two assets are coming out later in August. And then we're working with Renee Chang to develop a special supplement on the topic of justice. You know, the time requires it. And so we will have that release as well. And then going through each of the 9 chapters to ensure that, you know, language is current with the evolving nature of the way the discourse has shifted over these last 2 months or so. So please be on the lookout for those. While you're there on the AIA website, I encourage you to take a look at some of the other resources. Most are available just to the general public, and we certainly encourage their use, and check them out, give us feedback, and want to make that available to you. With that, I note the time of, I've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to pause so that we have plenty of time for questions and to see if there were any immediate that needed clarifying. A little difficult to follow the chat right now, but I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat, and Will, if there's anything that Deputy Mayor Shockley and I should know, please, you know, keep us posted.
Well, thank you so much. We do have about 25 to 30 minutes here to field a Q&A with the audience. So if you do have questions, please either use the toggle your hand feature, or you can ask directly into the chat. I wanted to take a minute to really recognize a couple of people in our audience. We're delighted to have Lance Collins, who's the president of SoCal NOMA, join us. And we're also delighted to have Deborah Weintraub, AIA, who's the deputy chief architect for the city of Los Angeles. And the reason I'm bringing up Deborah, putting her on the spot right now, is that we're really excited about the opportunities that Prop 16 will have on the November ballot, and how that might help provide greater access to procurement opportunities for small businesses, minority-owned firms. And so if, you know, Deputy Mayor Shockley and Deborah Weintraub can, you know, make sure that the AIA is here as a resource, we'd love to work with you on those efforts. I know that this is something that Deborah is very dear about. So, well, with that, we're open to questions, and welcome all the input that we have from the audience today.
Ms. Will, there are a couple of questions already. The first one is from Lance, actually. Lance, do you want to take the question yourself, or you want us to read it?
I'll repeat it for everybody. Thank you, Brenda and Renee and Steve, for the opening statements and presentations. I really appreciate that. Kind of hear what's going on at the city level and at the national level as well too. My question was sort of at the AIA national level. You know, you talked about sort of career readiness and sort of training for, you know, implicit bias and things like that. And I guess my concern or my question is, you know, the statistics show that the amount of Black architects in the profession really hasn't changed over the past 50 years. And a lot of these same strategies have been tried in the past. And you mentioned that sort of date of 2030 out there. And I guess my question is, what else is on the table outside of the sort of the conventional methods that we should be considering, that you are considering, to move that needle in a sort of faster pace?
Sure. And thank you for that question, Lance. You know, it's been an interesting journey. I was just on a call yesterday with the large firm roundtable, and they had assembled a roundtable for deans of schools of architecture. And this very question was raised at that time. And, you know, part of what I think we have to grapple with as, you know, supporting the profession and as society at large, we know that food, income disparities, all play a factor in our ability to enter into college, depending on your race or ethnicity, to successfully complete college. And we also know that those barriers are very real. That is not to excuse why there hasn't been significant movement. As a proportion, the percentage hasn't changed significantly. The number has increased, but the proportion keeps shifting. And so, you know, the few of the other ways that we are working intentionally with school counselors associations to ensure that there is a deep awareness of architecture as a profession for, you know, students who are considering careers, middle to high school primarily, but others as well. Working with state and local chapters who are directly in communities where schools are located to ensure that, you know, the saying goes, you can't be what you can't see. So I didn't know any architects growing up. I probably wouldn't have been a good architect either because that's not my skill set, but I just didn't know any. The only one that I sort of loosely had an awareness of was from the Brady Bunch and the father on the Brady Bunch. That was it. It wasn't in popular television, just wasn't present. Certainly there were no architects that I saw in my own community in Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, where I grew up. So getting into these networks, again, state and local chapters who are in schools, bringing architects in for career days, working with college and technical education networks to ensure that they are disseminating information, and also working with NOMA and projects like Project Pipeline to ensure that we're supporting efforts that are geared at increasing participation in the number of students who are entering into schools of architecture. Robert Ivy and I, the executive vice president and CEO of the AIA, we're presenting early August to the ACSA board. And we want to, you know, talk with them about what are the barriers that they're seeing in higher education. Is it scholarships? Is it, you know, what are their recruitment efforts? And this is where everyone coming together to contribute to solutions. We have to accelerate this, you know, the participation level. We see more women in the profession than we did 20, 30, 40 years ago. We see a growing number of Latinas who are enrolled in schools of architecture. We don't want to lose a single one. And so preserving folks as they come out of college and remain in the profession is also important. So we're looking at this multi-pronged approach, not one size fits all, but we have to address firm culture, studio culture, the college and university experience, ability to enter into school and to persist and to graduate successfully. And then once you graduate, on that pathway to licensure. So we're looking at it at all of those angles, and it's AIA plus, you know, many other partners who, you know, can contribute to better outcomes. So thank you for the question, Lance.
Thank you, Renee. I'm going to alternate questions for Renee and for Deputy Mayor Shockley. We have one question from Stephanie Regal. Stephanie, do you want to just like own the mic and ask the question?
Sure. Hi. Hi. So first of all, I wanted to clarify. I appreciate all the kudos. We were on a team. We were not selected, unfortunately. Our team was not selected for the new Department of Civil and Human Rights, sadly. But I did. My question is regarding that process. We're basically, there's a bench of 20 architects that are, you know, given the opportunity to go for projects in the city of LA. And it's renewed every certain years. And I think it's been about 7 years since the last time it was renewed. And so the 3 firms that went for that project is an example, which is a really important project, a really impactful, groundbreaking, you know, situation. There are 2 big mega firms and one, and you know, all of which are, you know, white owned and male owned, and the smaller one is still male owned and white owned. So I'm not so much speaking, I'm speaking for myself as well, obviously, as a small female business owner, but also really looking for how do we get wider inclusion for smaller minority owned firms when this pool is like set and stuck, you know, for a long time. So just wondering if there's a process that could be considered to allow for a larger, more diverse pool of applicants for city projects.
The answer is, oh, I'm sorry, ready? The answer, I think, lies in the baseline that we are seeking to establish regarding every department. Now, am I assuming is planning where does that bench of architects sit? Is that in the planning department or is it?
I can answer that, Deputy
Thank you.
Mayor. Yeah, the bench is 5 years old. There are 20 firms on it. 9 firms submitted for the Civil and Human Rights Department, and we interviewed a subset of that. The firm we chose is a large firm, but the team is led by 2 Black female architects and 1 Latino architect. So it's a diverse firm. I have initiated a process to create a smaller list of smaller emerging firms. And I've been collaborating with the mayor's office, particularly Christopher Hawthorne, on that. So we're in process. The city has set, the mayor's office has set aggressive goals for participation of minority, women, and other disadvantaged businesses in all of our contracts. And we do, through the Board of Public Works, a really robust effort to make sure that we meet those goals. So the answer is, each of these lists are very complicated to set up. And Stephanie, you email me at least every 3 months asking me about it. So I know you're interested, and we're working on trying to get a way to bring in smaller firms in an easier process, because setting up these lists takes 1.5 years. It's a lot of work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I
Thank
have
you,
a question for Renee, actually. Renee, you just posted a link to the AIA Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, and the question comes from Leslie Sidner, who is an AIA Los Angeles Board of Directors member. Leslie, would you like to address the question yourself, or do you want me to read it?
Oh, no, I was just wondering, would any of the JEDI considerations be added to the AIA Code of Ethics, or some other way to hold membership, and particularly membership firms, accountable to these goals?
Thank you for that question, Leslie. And I did post a link in case the AIA Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct may not be familiar. There are 2 particular segments that may be notable, and certainly as a member, that is the kind of question, if you are suggesting additional changes that you could introduce. But there is a section on noting that members shall not engage in harassment or discrimination on the basis of race, religion, national origin, age, disability, caregiver status, gender identity, or sexual orientation. And then secondly, members shall not engage in conduct involving wanton disregard of the rights of others. So there may be some other language that you are seeking, and I haven't read the Code of Ethics in detail today, but those 2 stand out to me as that may get to the heart of the question that you have. And then I also want to draw your attention to, and I'm happy to place a link here for further reading, the AIA introduced a series of where we stand statements, and they are on a range of topics that may also further, elucidate the AIA's position on broad societal matters. So I'll try to quickly do that search and post that in the chat as well. So again, thank you for the question, Leslie.
Thank you, Renee. I see a hand up. Shar, do you want to ask your question or know who the question is for?
Hi, yes, I would like to ask a question to Renee. I actually wanted to thank you for the link for the guides for equitable practice. It's one of the issues under compensation and licensure is what I'm working towards in the emerging professionals. With the emerging professionals, my question was, as an emerging professional, how can we help proceed these changes throughout our profession? One of the things that we're working on are formal letters right now that we're writing for AIA National and also NCARB. But is there a way you can guide us to know how exactly we can be helpful to get this rolling? Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you, Shar. Did I pronounce your name properly, Shar?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, using your voice just as you are just now and the letter that you're preparing to send out and disseminate, I also realize that when you are navigating your career, you're testing, assumptions, when is it safe to use my voice, maintaining employment and professional reputation is important as well. So I get that. I want to fully acknowledge that it may not always be safe to use your voice in the same way at all times. But using and leveraging that voice, I'm inspired by the power of the young architects as an example, when changes were made to the ARE exam process. And that came in large measure through advocacy from young architects who said, you know what, this model doesn't work. And they organized, they advocated, and changes were eventually made. Similarly, I see that collective voice being leveraged when the American Institute of Architectural Students came together to say, you know what, this studio culture is not working. We cannot work all-nighters for pinups and have crits that felt like they were, in some instances, reports of feeling denigrated or, not treated properly in the university student culture. And so they came together and they said, you know what, this isn't going to work. And they advocated for change, and we did start to see change. So that collective voice is important. You have a unique vantage point because you're the future of the profession. So long after we're all, doing something completely different, you are helping to shape and form the profession for the future. And hearing your voice, your perspective, your ideas is vitally important. That's one way. I think, as Deputy Mayor Shockley noted, don't turn away. When you see something, use that voice. We saw the power of citizens who recorded injustices on their phones that brought these matters into our forefront. And so those are important roles that you play. You're also a citizen. And so your vote matters, your advocacy matters, your volunteerism matters. What you do as an individual matters and contributes to shaping a better society as well. So your role professionally, and then your role as an individual. And don't lose sight of, there's you had a long haul ahead of you, and stay encouraged. I know it's not an easy haul that you've chosen for your career. Just really appreciate the contributions that you are making and will continue to make.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Janice, I think your question is very important, and I completely share your sentiments. So if you don't mind asking Mayor Deputy Shockley, your question would be great.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Janice Williams. I am also with SoCal NOMA, and thank you for everything that has been said on the panel thus far. So my question was for Deputy Mayor Brenda Shockley, and it was really just related to, just in general, like everything that is surrounding these topics of anti-racism and EDI and sort of all of the efforts and the current momentum that we have. But, you know, just as things continue to progress, as our lives continue to transition in other ways and become busy and we get caught up in our day-to-day, the reality is that, you know, our non-minority counterparts and our allies just simply may not be connected to this struggle and this fight the way that minorities and Black women like myself are. So, you know, I'm really just interested in learning about what strategies would you suggest or offer up to continuously propel this movement forward. I really want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make our voices heard, but also to make them received as well on the receiving end. And I want to just get your feedback or any advice that you would give to continue with that, because there's a lot of pressure that I know me and a lot of my colleagues may feel, and then some of my colleagues just may not feel like they have the voice to even, you know, express their concerns within their own organizations or their own firms. But I wanted to, I think a few things that you said, a lot of things that you said were really compelling, and just kind of wanted to know, like, when the hype does die down, what can we continue to do to keep our momentum?
Thank you for the question. And I am glad I had a chance to read it in the chat room. So I had a few moments to think about it. And I understand what you're saying, and I understand what you're feeling, because there is this urgency, and yet we don't know. I remember clearly in 1992, when there seemed to be just every opportunity to try and really make change, and all the corporations came out, and there was money coming from the federal government, and it seemed as though we really had the momentum that we needed. And I don't remember what it was. I think it was maybe Hurricane Andrew. I don't know, something like that. But the next trending tragedy, overnight, all those same people were gone to where that situation was. And we were left sort of looking at one another. And at that point we said, well, obviously it's on us. We just got to still keep going. So I know, and I have experienced what you are concerned about. One of the things about ED 27, and I think the mayor is very clear about that as well, and he and I are in total agreement that we want to do everything we can to make this moment be a movement, and starting where we are here in the city of Los Angeles. And it really becomes almost so basic in that institutional racism has to be addressed by institutional change. And what I mean by that, the reason that we are going to every department, having every department to appoint a racial equity officer, to do a racial equity plan, to participate in a racial equity task force, it goes back again to figuring out exactly where we are, making it clear that these are core values and core principles, and that anyone in the department, and then in turn in the city, is owning this. And then having the ability, as I've heard so many times, that if you can't measure, you can't manage. So to be able to have that ability to create goals, outcomes that can be measured, and then for there to also be the accountability. Because one of the things about ED 27 is that among the general managers who have annual reviews with the mayor, how their department is doing on the racial equity goals that they establish will be a part of their annual review, the same way that project completion is a part of it. Number of permits is a part of it. That it is indeed in the fabric of the governance of the city and of the department. When we work with the private sector, it's the same thing. And listening to, you know, a lot of really wonderful programs that Renee described, and I'm not trying to anticipate, because based on just her presentation, I know that goals and outcomes will be a part of it. Accountability will be a part of it. But there still needs to be those witnesses. That's what I call us. Those who see and insist that there be a response, that there be accountability, and that there be transparency. That really, we're talking about rights. Employment is a property right. People are being denied a lot of rights that aren't characterized as rights, but that is in fact what they are. Not all of that still will turn on will. It will turn on the political will, and it will turn on individual will. It will turn on the corporate will. But again, as we have seen, how much has changed just in the last few months. When the people truly speak and are indeed heard, change is much more possible and likely. And that goes back to what Renee ended with, and that we have to stay vigilant. We have to stay positive. After 3 of these, I'm still very hopeful, because I see the future in you young people, and how now we are more open and inclined to put aside the niceties and confront the realities of the degradation and the injustice and the lack of equity that has now really poisoned, in my opinion, our culture and is crying to be corrected.
Yeah. Well said. And may I just offer just a personal anecdote? And Janice, I'm so glad you asked that question, because it can feel exhausting and you can feel discouraged. In 1991, I was a young professional at the time, and I was working for the Urban League of Philadelphia. And that 1991 timeframe, I think it was like March or so of 1991, that memory is seared in my brain of seeing the brutal beating of Mr. Rodney King. And I remember when that happened, and, you know, though we had, you know, some fallout and protests in the Philadelphia area, our eyes were peeled to LA, your very communities. And what struck me at that time was, I went back in my little brain at the time, and I thought, gosh, I remember when I was like 10 or 11 years old, there was a young man who was a neighbor who was shot by the police, handcuffed and shot in the back. I want to say something like 12 times. It was atrocious. There were no cameras present for that, but our community, our neighborhood was outraged. He lost his life. And then fast forward to 1991 and seeing what was caught on camera and what had been calls for justice for a very long time. And this is not any, I'm not trying to make a political statement about policing, but what I do want to note is we can't allow ourselves to get back to being comfortable. We have to stick with being uncomfortable. We can't unsee what we saw with Mr. George Floyd's death and the news of others. So we have to hold that line, and as Deputy Mayor Shockley noted, we've got to stay current and vigilant on these matters. And just one more note, I'm often struck by, I'm not sure if LA has passed this resolution or not, but there are states across the United States where I, as a Black woman, have to be protected by law in order to wear my hair in its natural state. The Crown legislation. you know, that should not feel comfortable to any of us. And we ought to be using our voices in ways that makes that not okay, that I have to have law to protect my ability to just wake up and be who I am. So I think it's these kinds of moments that are galvanizing. I'm encouraged by the corporate response, where the dollars are and where changes are coming. I'm encouraged by the global nature of this movement. And I think this moment is such that these intersections that I spoke about in my opening are that moment where we can see this long-standing change and sustained change. I think we owe it to the future generations that we look back if people look back 20 years from now and say, well, what were you doing? What were you thinking? Why were you comfortable with that? I think that's shame on us, but it requires all of us to be head and hearts in trying to make those changes.
Thank you very much, Renee. And I guess unless anybody else has a question, I have a question from Deputy Mayor. So everybody, you know, when you take office, when a new president takes office, you have the first 100 days in which, you know, you go gang-ho and you're going to change everything in 100 days, great resolution. So for you, basically, what do the next 100 days, Deputy Mayor, look like? I mean, what is your, the number one biggest, you know, thing that you want to achieve in this next 100 days, symbolically?
All right, well, my 100 days started on June 19th. And in terms of that particular assignment and implementation, that time is, we gave ourselves barely 90 days because September 16th is when the mayor is to receive reports from all of the departments that include their plans and include the task force, and also a study of disparities throughout the city system, and then as well as an analysis of what the city will do should Proposition 16 pass in November and their 209 is repealed. So we're on a fast track, and I think again it's because you recognize that this is a window, and how long this window is open in terms of people's interest, in terms of the desire and the commitment to move. Now the other days, so that's my first 100 days. But today, and I really say this to you, and I beseech it, and I can't get over the fact that I'm actually on this call with Deborah Weintraub because she can really help us. The Los Angeles Unified School District announced a couple of weeks ago, that no students would not be returning to school in person, but that it would continue with online teaching. The problem with that is that close to 40,000 young people in the LAUSD system, K through 12, they either do not have reliable access to the Wi-Fi and the ability to access the learning, the distance learning, or they don't have access at all. Now, the school district is sort of responsible to come up with devices and the like, but I'm sure it comes as no surprise that South Los Angeles, parts of East Los Angeles, they have not gotten, they're always sort of at the bottom of the list in terms of the 5G, and I'm not literate in technology like that, but all the stuff that you have to be able to connect is not there, particularly the public housing developments that have 25,000 people living in them. They do not have reliable service. What we were told by some of these providers when we had a meeting, because school starts on the 17th or 18th of August, that they were being held up by their permits not being approved. And lo and behold, 50% of the permits they were waiting for were, guess what? For these areas where they don't have the accessibility. We're at South Los Angeles, it's Watts, it's East LA. And yes, that is a real racial equity issue real time. So yes, we're working on the plans, we're doing this, but my attention, you can't, just like with how we fund, you can't look away. And so if you want to know what my thing is, that by the 18th of August, that there is the ability for children who go to public school to be able, all children, to be able to learn, distance learning. And that is a challenge that is real. And that's part of my 100 days. It's the priority of this first 100 days for me.
That's a great challenge, and I wish you all the best with that. And I think we have time for one last question from Pablo. Pablo, do you want to take the microphone and ask the question?
Yeah, so can you guys hear me? I just wanted to ask, like, what are we doing as architects? How can we help more as architects to help rewrite and modify some of the zoning laws, community plans, and other codes that affected types of developments that seem to be creating more racial disparity and adding to the problem of the housing crisis in LA?
Who wants to take this question? Deborah, do you want to take a stab at that?
Well, zoning and is not my department, that's planning, but I do know that, community plans are being rewritten right now, and the planning department has been historically quite open to involvement from AIA members who want to get involved with those discussions, particularly, Pablo, in your community where you live. I'd urge you to get involved with community plan updates. And Deputy Mayor, maybe you want to add something to that?
Well, I guess only to echo you that this is where we own it. You want to work on this, you bring together the people. We are available. Like you say, we can get with Vince Bertoni and make sure that there's the access. There's always, I think, an interest. It's just a matter of how to make the connection. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important to have forums like this, because Will has certainly all of our information. You have Deborah's information. Whatever you have in mind, contact one of us, and we will, if we don't do it, we put you in touch, because the community plans, and I think there's a real byproduct now that work is going to change, so much is going to change going forward, that everything has to be revisited. And this is a good time to be able to insert those things that and elevate those issues that you feel are creating the greatest disparities, and racial disparities or economic disparities, but that this is where we're all accessible. And I know I'm interested in knowing what you regard as those disparities, because we're also dealing with the services that the city provides. And just like with, who would have thought that the metro would be seen as a threat because of gentrification and what that represents. So it gets really, it's double-edged, and yet it's got to be discussed. And the more we have people like you who want to raise it and point it out, the less excuse there is on our side to not attend to that and acknowledge it and move ahead.
I think this
advocacy in its finest.
This is a great way to end this session. I want to thank Deputy Mayor Brenda Shockley. I want to thank Renee Yancey with the IA. I want to thank Deborah Weintraub for attending. Thank you very much for your time.